right. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Hobo Thingo podcast. Another week, another episode. Very thrilled to have all of you here again, tuning in. For those wondering, I am your host, Crystal Cedino. I'm the Training Development Manager for the Native Learning Center. My right hand, unfortunately, is not joining us today, but she does say hello. Today with us, we have a very special guest, Shantae Moore. She's a certified financial educator. She's done webinars with us and many other podcast episodes. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Shantae.
Hey, Crystal. Thank you guys so much for having me back today. For those of you who don't know me, again, my name is Shantae Moore. I'm a certified financial educator. I'm also the director of Native American Financial Literacy Services. I've been teaching financial literacy workshops for the past 7, 8 years, but I've been in the financial services for 15 years. So I'm happy to impart some of my knowledge in today's podcast again. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining on another week, another episode. We're excited to discuss this week's episode, which is going to be the 7 money milestones to financial security and independence. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what that revolves around?
Yeah, for sure. So I often, in my practice, in my business, I work with hundreds of families one on one when it comes to helping them with their finances. And a lot of folks come to me and they're like, okay, Shantae, I have extra money or I have this little savings and or whatever. I have these financial goals, but I don't know where to start. I don't know what to work on first, or should I do this? And these 7 money milestones are literally the step by steps that I recommend to folks to take. Like what do you do first? So we'll talk about each step, why they're important, and why folks need to look at each step when it comes to evaluating their finances.
Awesome. So I'm excited to dive into this one. So I guess let's go ahead and just jump off, right? With that, I'm seeing that the first, I guess, milestone would be get a financial education.
Yeah, so I always tell folks, all of these money milestones are super critical, but the first one is getting financially educated, which is the first thing I talk to anybody. If anyone knows me, I teach these workshops. I use a book called How Many Work Stop Being a Sucker, because you have to be financially educated. And then also at the same time to remember that you should take your education and work hand in hand with the financial professional, because they'll be the ones to kind of fill in the gaps and look at your individual situation, to help with any missing details that you might need. And when I look at financial education, I just tell folks, they don't know what they don't know. I mentioned it before on one of our other podcasts. We hear so many financial terms. We see so many things on the news, on social media, and we have a lot of expert, non-experts that I talk about who are talking about these things. And I just believe that you should be fully educated and have confidence in joining these conversations. So the first step is absolutely to start learning about the basic concepts. So one thing that I offer anyone that I connect with is a copy of the book that I mentioned, How Many Work Stop Being a Sucker. Now, I did not write this. This was written by two authors named Steve Siebold and Tom Matthews. They've both been in the financial industry for over 30 years, and they also work with wealthy-minded folks. So this is a super easy book. I'll be happy to send a free copy to anyone who would like it. That will post a link to it in the podcast description. This is the easiest book I've ever read about personal finances. Super simple. A lot of pictures. It's not big words, because the financial world is so intricate. There's so many, it can be very boring at times. But I like this book because it's really simple. And that's the easiest tool that I can share with folks to become financially educated.
Absolutely. I know it can also be very scary because of that, because there's so much information out there and you don't know who to trust and who not to trust. So, absolutely. Thank you for being one of those avenues where we can guide our listeners to, because Shantae is definitely someone we believe to trust. So, thank you, Shantae. All right. So, with that being said, I see another milestone here, which states secure proper protection. Do you mind expanding on that?
Yeah, so having proper protection is mile number two for a really important reason. So, when we talk about protection, I'm talking about protecting yourself and your family from a possible future loss of income or savings, really before you begin your financial journey. It's honestly, it's the first thing that I talk about with all my clients that they need to address first. And they're like, why would I talk about protection? Protection, in other words, means insurance. In particular, I'm talking about life insurance. And the reason being is because if you were to die prematurely, your family could be left without not only your income, in addition to being left without you, but whatever savings that you actually do have left over, it might not be enough to take care of them in the future. So again, I meet a lot of folks. They're like, "Oh, well, I want to invest my money. Let's talk about that." And I'm like, "Your investment won't matter if you're no longer here because that investment will be gone just because your family will have to use it up." So let's leverage insurance, life insurance in particular, so that we can make sure that we have enough coverage in place for our families moving forward. We don't have to worry about if something happened to me that my family won't be okay.
Right. No, absolutely. All right. Well, another milestone, create an emergency fund. I think Cora would love this one.
Yeah, have an emergency fund, and this is after you have milestone number two covered, of course. Is to create your emergency fund. And I know you teach classes on this as well. Anyone who's financially savvy will tell you you should have 3 to 6 months of your annual income, saved somewhere to prepare for any unexpected expenses. That could be like for unforeseen medical bills or home appliance repairs, or, I have to get my car fixed, all the time. And the main thing is, what if we become unemployed? So we want to make sure we have money set aside for those real emergencies. And I recognize a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck. A lot of people are, especially because of this ongoing pandemic. And your emergency fund could really give you like that cushion that you need from not having your family go into this whole big financial disaster. So I do have some tips when it comes to having an emergency fund. But not even tips, really just two rules. Like there are rules of the money game. The first rule with your emergency fund is to only use it for actual emergencies. That's it, and that's it. It's not for gifts. It's not for traveling. It's not for buy one get one sales. And it really doesn't matter if it's like in a checking account, a savings account. I like to use low cost investment accounts because you could get a little bit more growth. But the whole point is that you have the money set aside and you're not tempted to use it for anything. That's the first rule. Now, the second rule is that if you actually need to use your emergency fund for a real emergency, like to replace the fridge or pay for braces for your kids, don't hesitate to use this money. I have so many people that are like, I don't want to touch my emergency fund, because they don't want to feel like that account has just reduced in value. That's what it's there for. The whole point is to use it for the emergency and then just make sure that afterwards you just start adding back a little bit, month after month until your emergency fund is is back full again. The whole point of having an emergency fund is that we just don't have to resort to credit cards because the credit cards will get you into more debt and it'll just keep you from further from behind for moving forward to reach your goals.
Right. And should there be, or I mean, what is your recommendation for, I guess, an amount in there? Because obviously everyone's finances are totally different and it's not going to be the same across the board. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months of income, but that can be a lot of money. That can be thousands of dollars. And most folks, when they're starting out, that seems like a big daunting number. They're like, that's maybe $5,000, $10,000 that you're telling me to save. I always tell folks just start with simple goals. Start with a $500 goal. And then once you reach there, start with $1,000. And then once you reach that goal, start with 1 month of your income. It will take time. It'll probably take you a full year, maybe even longer, to build up a proper dollar amount for your emergency fund. But, take those baby steps and just start putting aside the money step by step and just being consistent with it. Some folks don't do it because they're like, that's, $5,000, $10,000. I can't put that away right now. No, you're not supposed to. You're supposed to take a little bit time after time, a little bit month after month to get to that larger number. So just know that have some patience, give yourself some grace. It will take time to build up a real, solid emergency fund.
Absolutely. Think that's the one thing that probably stops people. They think like, oh my gosh, I'm never gonna get there. But like you said, it's gonna take time. I think it's just a matter of like, doing it and committing to it. And like you said, not
Hmm.
touching it.
Right,
Like,
exactly. Stay away from it.
yeah. All right. So milestone number uh,
Or
4. Okay, there we go. 4. Apply debt management.
yeah, so once you've worked with your financial professional to like, square away your proper protection, make sure you have enough life insurance in place and you have your emergency fund and not even like the full amount of the emergency fund, like you've established it. So again, don't think I have to have all these other things in place first. No, we're talking about just getting these things started. Now it's time to start talking about managing your debt, which is milestone number 4, because I tell you, before you could really fully enjoy financial security and independence, you need to take a look at your spending habits and strive to either reduce or eventually eliminate your debt. You'll never feel good about your money if you're always owing someone or something. One thing statistically, we know that the average American today has 28,000, almost $29,000 in personal debt. And that's not even including a mortgage. And so, and a lot of folks have a lot much more than that. And on the other side of that, Americans, they're suffering from a lot of anxiety as well when it comes to having all this debt. So it's a real big issue for a lot of Americans right now. And again, once you remove debt, that's when you could really start to enjoy life more freely. You can start to have more like, oh, this weight lifted off of you. And things have been going, things have been hard right now. So I do have 5 tips that I want to share about, eliminating and getting out of debt, because obviously it's often this big thing like I want to pay down my debt, but how do we get there? So my first tip is to eliminate and stay out of debt is to first know what you owe. I tell folks all the time, just write down what debt you have, what loans do you have, the credit cards, and not just like, oh, I owe Chase, I owe Discover Card. No, write down the amounts, write down the interest rate, write down the minimum payments that you owe, like, and just start to get an idea of like, okay, this is the debt that I have. Like, let's look at it head on. Um, the second tip is, no more late payments. I think that's the biggest thing that folks are just pay late and they don't realize those late payment fees will add up. And not only that, it's impacting your credit score as well. And my third tip, I think this is probably the most important one that I'll share today, is to go after one debt at a time. Because I do meet a lot of folks that trying to pay down their debt. They're like, oh, I'm putting a little extra here, a little extra there, and a little extra there. Honestly, that strategy won't work well for you. You really want to tackle one debt. Any extra money, attack one debt at a time. We call this a snowball method. It's described in the book. Where you could choose to pay off your smallest balance first or the debt with the highest interest rate. Either or really doesn't make a big difference. But put all your extra money at that one debt, because little here, little there, that's not a good, wise strategy. Um, Another tip, my tip number 4 is, stop charging your cards, but also cancel unused subscriptions. All these unused gym memberships we don't use. I mean, I know that during the pandemic when we were stuck at home, we signed up for a lot of things and oh, it's just $2.99 a month here, or, $4.99 a month here. But if you did that 5, 10 times, those little amounts will add up a lot. And we're probably not even using those things. I just canceled like a $4.99 Apple something subscription that I signed up for my daughter. She doesn't even use it anymore. So those things are ways that you could, stop getting into more debt. And then the fifth tip I have for those of you who are homeowners, if you have a mortgage, now is actually a really good time to consider refinancing your mortgage. Interest rates are really low. So when you're approved for a loan, you have a certain interest rate that you're paying. The lower the interest rate, the lower your repayments. And so it's just a good time to see if that's something you might qualify for, especially if you have some type of equity in your home. So those are my tips for like managing your debt, just getting a handle on it.
Absolutely. And I've also heard if you're able to make one extra payment a year, you can knock like 10 years off your mortgage, I
Yeah.
believe. So
Yeah.
how crazy is that?
A little bit goes a lot. And one thing I want to mention too is notice I didn't say pay off all of your debt. No,
Right.
like it's just starting a plan to work toward it. Because again, a lot of folks will tell me, well, Shantae, I need to pay off all of my debt first and then I'll start saving. Like, no, just start working on a plan to get your debt under control.
Right. Absolutely. Well said. Well said. All right. Well, milestone number 5 now, increase cash flow.
Yeah, so increasing your cash flow is milestone number 5 because a lot of folks they're concerned. They're concerned about saying things are really tight right now. I don't have enough money coming in. When the wealthy folks, on the other hand, they don't have that problem. They're always thinking about how can I bring in more cash flow. So we really need to start thinking beyond working, normal jobs. We really think we need to really look at how can we seek to earn additional income. What other sources of income can I bring in for my family on top of better managing your expenses? So you want to minimize your expenses, but also increase your income. And so I want to talk about how can we do this. I do have a few things to go through about how to do that. So the first thing, and I know you talk about it all the time, Crystal, is create and stick to a budget, right? Like look at your wages that you have versus your expenses. Let's weigh our needs versus our wants. A lot of times we're spending our money on things that we don't even need. And it is a sacrifice, a quote unquote sacrifice where you have to like not spend as much, not splurge as much as you want to. I know we all want to do nice things for ourselves, but if you really, really want to get a hand on your finances, you have to have some discipline and know where to like just limit yourself. Another tip that I have is to develop a written game plan. And what I mean by that is you're really like creating a system to where you could spend less than what you earn. It's just really adopting this idea of, living below your means. We hear that all the time. Like, let's just buy things that we can actually afford. I always tell folks, if you can't buy it with the cash that's in your pocket, then you shouldn't be buying it at all. And that's again a way to apply a discipline to yourself so that you can free up your money and lower your expenses. um, Another way that you can increase your cash flow, and when I'm talking about increasing cash flow, I'm talking about putting more money back into your pockets, is also to reduce spending on expenses like your car and homeowners insurance. And a way that you can do that is by changing your deductibles on those policies. If you have a higher deductible, your premiums will become lower. So, for example, like myself, I've never been in a car accident. God willing, that never happens. But why would I pay such a low deductible? Which means that if I had an accident, my deductible is what I have to pay to get my car repaired or the other person's car repaired. But if I'm a safe driver and I know that those chances are very, very low, I don't need to have a $500 deductible. My deductible is actually $1,000, so that if there's a chance that if that ever happens to me, my deductible, that's what I would pay. But for the years and years and years that I've driven a car, I've never had to pay that deductible. So having those higher deductibles, again, it applies to homeowners insurance as well. It will free up more money. Your policy will be much, much less expensive. Um, Another tip I have that I talked about before on another podcast is to reposition your savings. A lot of folks are saving into accounts that are earning little to no interest, where you could actually reposition that money into accounts that give you higher interest rates. And I get asked all the time, well, where should I do that, Shantae? Where do I get those higher interest rates? That's where you want to sit down with a professional. Because again, like I said, I like to use investment accounts because I can make them pretty safe, but I can get better returns. That's just a strategy that I personally like to use, but there are much, much better ways to grow your money, and it's not just sitting there. And then the last tip to get more money back in your pocket is, again, if you're a homeowner and if you have some equity in your home, you have an opportunity where you could probably let go of your private mortgage insurance, your PMI. Because a lot of folks, when you get a mortgage to have that loan, the banks protect themselves by having this PMI added into your loan. And if you qualify, you could actually get to a point where you have that removed because you have enough equity in your home. And so again, that puts more money back in your pocket. So always remember, look at these different things. These are just a couple of tips that I, put out there that folks could use. But then a professional, financial professional could always sit with you and help you, go through these ideas and many more.
Absolutely. It's just so funny because, when we're talking about creating an emergency fund and, increasing cash flow, my mind keeps going back to that sucker cycle that we talked about on the last episode, and making sure every dollar has a purpose. I think we said that in the first episode that we've done in all of these. So it's just so interesting how it really gets your mind going, because I've been thinking about that more and more, and I'm like, you know what? Yeah, maybe it's time to like reassess certain things. And I think that's maybe also something we should mention too, that like your budget and whatnot isn't always going to be the same. Like I think through life, you're going to have to readjust. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, things do change. I sit with my clients and I'm like, look, I will check in with you because you might get married, you might get divorced, you might have a child, you might move. Like so many things can affect your finances. So we have to be fluid about our money because even when folks, I'll talk about it on our next money milestone, is like investing and building wealth, they think it's just one strategy, one account, and that's it. Like, no, there's different ways that we can apply our budget and our expenses, and we have to be flexible. We have to adjust. So you don't want to create a plan for yourself that's so frigid that there's no wiggle room for you to make adjustments.
Right. Right. So, well, with that being said, our next milestone is build your wealth, the sixth one. So go ahead and expand on that one.
Yeah, Mile Number Stone 6, it's a big one and it's super exciting because it focuses on building wealth. And the reason why it's really exciting is because this milestone is where you really see, your results of your hard work. Like if I save my money, I could see my bottom line growing. But this is also a milestone where it's important for you to understand taxes. You have to understand, losses to money that you save or invest. We also have to talk about inflation because inflation is the cost of living going up, and your savings and your wealth has to keep up with inflation at minimum. And you really want to sit down and figure out, okay, what can I do best to accumulate and grow my net worth? And so, a couple of things I wanted to touch on for this particular milestone is it's not just about building wealth. We also have to think about longevity. How long do I expect to live? We are living long lives, especially with medical advances. And you have to think, well, will my wealth live as long as I do? And you have to really be able to answer that question. A lot of folks are really worried about running out of money in retirement. Will they have to go back to work? Or again, what if I take a big loss in the stock market? How will that affect my finances and investments in the future? And those are things that we really look at. So with milestone number 4, one, we just got to get started. Because we're talking about today's conversation is about how do I improve my finances, what are the steps? So we already know we need to be educated, we already know we need to have proper life insurance, we have to start establishing an emergency fund, we have to start a plan to pay down our debt. We also know that the fifth money milestone is bringing in more money. So now that you've made all those smart decisions, what do we do with that extra money? What do we do with this, now that we have all those, that good foundation established? That's where the money milestone number 6 comes into place. But you have to get started. You have to think about, okay, now that I know, I'm comfortable everywhere else, how much money can I really set aside? And where can I put that money? We talked about in the last podcast about like the rule of 72, where we learned in that whole conversation, interest rates matter. Your rate of return matters. So I think this is probably a money milestone where you really want to sit with a financial professional to help you determine what investments make sense for me. How do taxes affect me? Is the stock market even for me? Is that something I should consider? Or are there other places that I could set aside my money? And then looking at, okay, again, how do taxes interject? How do I not lose money? Um, what will my wealth look like long term? When we talk about saving and investing money, you don't just cross your fingers and hope that it works out. Like, you have to have a strategy and you have to be wise about it. But there's definitely different ways you can grow and invest, and those are entire topics on their own. But I think my whole point and understanding is that establish the foundation first, then know what you have left over to use to grow and accumulate wealth.
Absolutely. Because you can't imagine trying to build a house without a ground to build it on. So, absolutely. All right. Well, so now we are headed to our seventh money milestone, which seems to be protect your wealth. So, go ahead and expand on that one.
Yeah, so the last money milestone is protecting your wealth. And this is really by creating a will and other estate planning documents to really protect and guard against your legacy. Um, if you made all these good decisions up to this point, the last decision you have to secure is making sure that all these assets that you've created, all these accounts that you've established, your good financial foundation that you've established. Now, how can I make sure that those things pass on to my loved ones? And you do that by protecting your wealth and having a proper estate plan. Now, I always tell folks, look, I'm not a lawyer at all, and I don't ever claim to be, but I help my clients with this very often because even rich people miss this sometimes. They don't have wills or estate plans in place. Like we heard of Aretha Franklin passing away and not having her estate in place, or Prince, like the famous pop singer, he died without having these things in place. And it's not just for the wealthy. And I think that's one of the big misconceptions that people think is, oh, well, I don't have millions of dollars. Why do I need a will or a trust or these things? No, that's absolutely far from the truth. I can't tell you how many families I've seen argue once grandma died, and they're arguing over her jewelry and her spoons and her TVs. Even our simple families argue over these things, and that's estate planning matters. So when I'm talking about estate planning, there's really four documents that you should at minimum have in your plan. As having a will, which basically outlines, excuse me, according to your state, who can handle the affairs of your estate because you name an executor of your estate. But also, if you have minor children, your will establish who you want to be named the guardian of your children. But then little assets that you have, like, oh, my car, I want so and so to take over my car, or I want so and so to get the money from my bank accounts. Those basic assets is where your will really determine who gets those things. And then other documents you would have would be financial power of attorneys and healthcare power of attorneys. So again, these are things where you have people in place who can make financial or medical decisions for you when you cannot. And I think that's really important. So say, for example, if I'm a single woman and I'm in a car accident and I'm in a coma all of a sudden, I have documents in place for someone who can make decisions for me and they know what I would like to have. Another document to have is a HIPAA release authorization. So HIPAA, protects your medical history. It's important to have those documents in place to have someone who could access your medical records, who could, get your prescriptions for you if you need them. And again, a legal professional can help you put all these things in place. I have some resources that I use with my clients. But again, ultimately, the point of having an estate plan and protecting your wealth is so that you avoid the government stepping in and making those decisions for you. Because if you don't have anything in writing, then some judge in some random court in your county will be able to decide who gets your property, who takes care of your children. And that's when we go through a process called probate. And nobody wants to go through that if they don't have to. So that's why it's really important for you to have your estate plan in place, but at a minimum, just start having these conversations with your loved ones so they know your wishes, or they're confident in knowing what assets that they should be receiving if something were to happen to you.
Awesome. Speaking of probate, we actually do have some webinars on that. for anyone wondering what that's like. It's specific to Indian country, I believe, and I think it was in reference to Oklahoma, but nonetheless, it's a good, way to have some insight on that. All right. Well, thank you, Shantae, for, providing us with the 7 money milestones. I thought this was extremely helpful. And it's almost kind of like a checklist, if you will. That's how
Yep.
I was kind of like seeing it, and it has, sub, items and whatnot. But I definitely think that for our listeners who are listening, it's a good way to kind of like look at things and like, oh, let me make sure, like all of my items are in order, like my finances and so on and so forth. So thank you.
Yeah, yes, you're welcome. You're absolutely right. It is. It's literally a checklist of at least thinking about these things. Do they apply to everyone? Every milestone does not apply. But yeah, at least thinking, okay, does this make sense for me? What should I do? How should I apply it to myself? And then again, ultimately, if you need more help, I always tell folks, work with a financial professional. I know my company has a team of professionals who will sit down, look at your financial situation, and guide you through all the money milestones to make sure you're fully squared away. And I promise you, once you establish that financial foundation, you had a perfect acronym. It's like building a house. You can't just start at the roof. You have to lay that foundation and build it from there. And that's what these 7 money milestones do. Once you establish these things and have, at least reviewed them and gone through every area, you'll be so solid and secure. It won't matter if you lose your job. It won't matter what decisions the government comes out with or anything. Your finances will be solid, they'll be locked in, and you will be okay. And that's what our whole goal is, to help people not continue, to continue avoiding these financial devastations that unfortunately our communities deal with on a regular basis. So thank you. Yes, thank you for having me on to share those today.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you. And just, I guess, to make another note, not all financial, you mentioned this, I think, on not the last one, but maybe the one before that, they don't all cost money to speak to someone, right?
Yeah,
So
most financial professionals, there are some that charge a fee, but they probably work with, higher net worth clients. All of my clients are average people. They work regular jobs. And because of my relationship with, Native Learning Center, I don't charge a fee for my services. So yes, it doesn't hurt. It could be your local banker, but again, having someone who's knowledgeable and trustworthy, who you feel can give you unbiased advice. That's what you really want to get resources for. And I can help with that. And I know Crystal and the team, they have my contact information for anyone who's just looking for guidance. Like, okay, who should I talk to? Who's in my area? Who can I go to for that support?
absolutely. And with that being said, go ahead and do a plug for yourself so that, for those who do want to reach out to you to get any resources, anything can.
Yeah, so as mentioned, this is the best resource that I can give anyone. Oh, my camera. Okay, there we go. It's called How Money Works, Stop Being a Sucker. This again is a book that I offer to anyone who's introduced to me. You can get this on my website at howmoneyworks.com/ Shantae W. Moore /book. And there you'll be able to get a copy of the book, but you'll be able to also schedule a complimentary 30-minute phone conversation with me. I'm happy just to have a conversation, see what your goals are, what resources I can share with you, which may or may not include my one-on-one financial planning services as well. Again, those are things that I don't charge for at all.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I know I just talking about this because I know a lot of individuals aren't comfortable with talking about money, which makes sense. It's a big topic. Um, but I think just talking about it here in this conversation we've had makes me feel better. So I hope it's made our listeners feel better. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning into this week's episode. We definitely appreciate your following and listenership. So thank you, thank you, thank you. If you wanted to reach out to the Native Learning Center to maybe inquire about technical assistance or anything else, Feel free to reach out to me specifically. My email is Crystal Cedeno at semtribe.com. So KRYSTALC as in cat, EDENO at semtribe.com. And just follow us for our as well on our social media sites such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and this podcast, where we release it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, and I believe we even have a page on our website, which is www.nativelearningcenter.com. So tune in, stay tuned. We, look forward to providing you more episodes, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.